So here in the eighth and final session for the course, what we are going to investigate a little bit farther is using JavaScript for form design and for form, I'm going to call it supervision, frankly. And so for those of you who haven't buried this memory from Web 101 is you'll remember that I really do believe in the web designer's responsibility to maintain the aspects of data for the organization. And I will tell you, that has been my experience. It is not my preference. I am somebody who believes in, designing for the customer irrespective of what the numbers mean sometimes. But my experience in my own career, my experience in working with other organizations, my experience in even just reading and taking classes even in web courses myself is data drives everything. And I'm on board with that to a certain extent. Clearly, I'm on board with that to the extent that I'm going to have you guys spend this final week investigating JavaScript for form supervision. So let me kind of tell you a story. And that story starts all the way back at Web 101. In Web 101, we used form design to help the unknown potential future client enter data correctly, right? So we said if a client is given a web form and that web form only has address in it, there is a lot of ambiguity there for the client to enter in their data. Do they mean Illinois and spell it out? Do they mean IL? Am I a new, I'll be gentle, new transplant to Illinois? And do I think it's IS for whatever reason? There's a lot of ambiguity there that we are giving our responsibility for supervision of data over to our users. And that's really not where the responsibility lies. It lies with us. So we used the field names. We used text. We used whatever we could do with just HTML and just CSS in order to help the user enter data correctly. And without a server or without scripting, that really is the best that we can do, because there's no tool built into HTML and there's no tool built into CSS that helps us dynamically manage the content there. So we have two options. We can rely on the server to help us supervise the data that is being entered, or we can rely on the client side to help us manage and supervise the data as it's being entered. And what I'll tell you is, in a perfect world, you have an amalgamation, a mixture of the two. What we will be relying here in this session, what we will be relying on is the server-side scripting. So again, that's JavaScript. We are going to rely on JavaScript to help on the client side supervise that data. So the form management that you are going to see here is going to do those things that hopefully you are accustomed to seeing in a web form, like date format should be entered, month, date of birth should be entered, month, day, year. So, should that be 12/02/20, or should that be DEC 2/2020? Whatever. We're going to rely on JavaScript to help us manage and supervise the entry of that data. Now, that is, frankly, it's way better than we were able to do with web forms in Web 101, right? Because now, as a user is entering data into a field, we can actually create a two-way communication there, right? So the user is entering in data and they enter it in incorrectly. Remember, it's not incorrectly, it's just not in accordance with the data that we're looking for, because if we allow a user to enter in something incorrectly, the fault usually lies with you as a developer because it means you didn't supervise the data entry adequately enough. So we use client-side scripting to make sure that the user is entering data in the format we expect it to be. So 12-02-2020, that's the date format we're looking for, so we can use client-side scripting, JavaScript, in order to do that. Now, if we were strictly client-side, we would rely on the user and their browser with HTML and CSS. We would rely on the user and their browser with JavaScript. And it's not perfect there, right? Because what happens is we would then rely on, a third party connection, mail, in other words, in order for us to get that data from the user. And remember, that interaction is more work intensive for you because you, as part of the web team, would then have to take that comma separated file, you'd have to add it to a database someplace, and that still means that there are things for you to do. So we would rely still on HTML, on CSS, and on JavaScript to be able to display and manage and supervise the data. But then preferably what we would do is we would rely on PHP and we would rely on other server-side technologies as well in order to actually suck up that data. So we would have a post method for that. We would then rely on the server side to, number one, double check the data. That's always still a good idea. Things happen during transmission. It's not 100% reliable. So it's always a good idea. Remember the garbage in, garbage out data theory we talked about in Web 101, which was if I allow bad data to get into my database, the whole database is potentially corruptible from there because bad data leads to bad decisions. So we've had one layer of protection against bad decisions with JavaScript. Let's add a second layer against it with PHP or other server-side technologies. So let's double check the data. Now, as it goes into our database, we would be able to do things like assign private keys. We would be able to assign things like, primary keys as well, so that each unit of data, however it is that we look at that, each customer or each client or each transaction would get its own key. So there's a lot of things that we can do with that now that we've got the server side involved. So really, a good data interaction is going to, envelop everything that you have seen to date. It's going to involve HTML and CSS, JavaScript, and server-side technologies, and all of those work together. Now, again, one of the things we kind of put those like discussionary blinders on in Web 101 is you can do all of this with HTML and CSS. And is it true that you could do all of this with your own web server, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP? Yeah, you could. In that way lies madness. That is bullshit. You would never choose to do that. I mean, you might choose to do that, but it's insane. So maybe don't. Really, we would rely on tools that are baked into server architectures that we can use as a platform as a service. One of the things I'll mention to you here is there is PaaS, Platform as a Service. There's, while you've got your LinkedIn Learning, and I know what you're doing, you're rolling your eyes at me. I see you saying like, I am not doing any more work than I have to because it's associated with a class. But just the Platform as a Service, I don't want to put it in with the with our course in LinkedIn, because I just feel like that leads to confusion. If you look up PAAS, it's literally the first one that comes up. It's a 47-minute video. I will put the description under this, um, and I will put notes around it that say extra so that you'll know. But platforms as a service are really the way to go. What it allows you to do is make a small upfront investment in a monthly access to a platform someplace. So you will choose, Bluehost, HostGator, One and One, whatever you want to do. Actually, Yahoo has one. Don't choose Yahoo, but you could if you wanted to. And the benefit to using the platform is they will deal with the security updates, they will deal with the backup, they will deal with the management. When something goes wrong, they deal with fixing it. And the same goes true with your, the pre processing, so your PHP. The server takes care of those things for you, so you don't have to worry about how do I maintain all the bandwidth, how do I maintain the connection, how do I maintain all these things. The platform worries about that stuff for you. It is an infinitely smarter. There are other ways, there are other words rather I wanted to put in there, but really I mean smarter. But I also mean like less daft. That's the best way to use your time, because that means as a web developer, you have more time to keep your site current. It means as a web developer, you have more time to ensure that forms are working properly. As a web developer, it means that you have more time to reach out to your potential and current clients and do a better job of everything else. The less time you have to be a server administrator, the more time it gives you for the content there. So that is the rationale that we're using here for JavaScript for web forms. Is one of the most important things you are going to do as a web designer is be a gatekeeper for good data. Good data in, good data out, garbage in, garbage out. That whole, process starts with you, actually.